Crippled by jealousy and growing up in a broken home, today we discuss the rise and fall of Miss Irresistible, Christine Paolilla. A story of envy and mass murder in Clear Lake City, Texas, a town known for its high-profile crime and murder committed by women like Andrea Yates, Lisa Nowak, and Clara Harris. Born on March 31st, 1986 in Long Island, New York to her parents Lori and Charles Paolilla, Christine experienced tragedy at an early age when her father died tragically in a construction accident at work. Her mother told the press in 2009,
"I had to go home and tell my children that Daddy wasn't coming home anymore."
After the death of her husband, Christine's mother turned to drugs and alcohol to feed her pain, and eventually lost custody of Christine and her brother. The pair were taken in by Lori's parents, but difficult circumstances still lay in the road ahead as Christine was diagnosed with alopecia at the tender age of 5. Alopecia is a common autoimmune disorder that results in unpredictable hair loss. Affecting roughly 6.8 million people in the United States, Christine endured the loss of her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes in clumps. She turned to wearing cheap wigs found at the Halloween store. She also suffered from poor vision and had to wear thick bottle cap glasses. This caused a lot of bullying by her peers, which severely affected her self-confidence.
Psychologically, to a young person, this can take a huge toll. Hair is hugely important to girls, to women. It's a symbol of femininity. It's a symbol of feminine power,
claims psychologist Dr. Gail Saltz, author of Anatomy of a Secret Life, The Psychology of Living a Lie. Dr. Saltz also described the impact that the loss of parents could have on a young girl. Losing a father at an early age puts someone at risk. It's abandonment, a very frightening one. And then, of course, being essentially abandoned by your mother in the setting of her using drugs. That's sort of a double whammy because that is losing the most important person in your life. It's hard to not internalize that as a tremendous rejection, a blow to self-esteem and questions of how lovable am I if my mother is no longer taking care of me. When Christine was in high school, she was reunited with her mother, who had finally kicked her drug habit and had remarried a man named Tom Dick. The family moved to Clear Lake City, Texas, a suburb of Houston, to begin a new life together. Christine was enrolled at Clear Lake High School, known as the pride of its manicured suburban community. It was a large school with hundreds of students that created a variety of cliques. Rachel Colorotis and Tiffany Rowell were the popular girls in high school. Tiffany was a talented actress who dreamed of becoming a social worker. Rachel's sister described her as
a very fun person. She was always kind of moving and bubbly and talkative.
Rachel was the typical beautiful girl next door who loved art and creative writing. Her peers described her as the top dog of her friend group, but she floated a lot and became friends with many different types of people. Her dad described her as the type of person that always looked out for the underdog and always tried to help others. Because of this, Christine's disorder made Rachel feel for her. Christine came home from school one day excited to tell her mother that she had made new friends, who she described as the sweetest girls she had ever met.
The sweetest girls I've ever met.
She constantly spoke about how fun they were to hang out with and how loving they were. Even though they were older than Christine, the three developed a bond quickly, and the popular girls helped Christine pick out new wigs, gave her beauty tips, and transformed her from an awkward misfit into a high school goddess. Rachel and Christine met in communications class and worked on projects together. Their relationship hinged on Christine's longing to feel accepted and popular. Her mother said the biggest sign that Christine trusted her new friends was that she felt okay without the wig on with them, which was not something that she did with many of her friends.
She was voted by the school 2003 Miss Irresistible. They did it because they felt that she was the person who they just loved because of the way she was.
That same year, Rachel and Tiffany graduated high school and attempted to continue their relationship with Christine. However, when Rachel moved in with Tiffany to the home she grew up in on Millbridge Drive, they became busy with their new lives. which left Christine feeling left out and alone. Resentment began to build as she started spending more time with her boyfriend, Chris Snyder, who already had a criminal past and enjoyed taking part in the use of drugs. Chris was about 2 years older than Christine, and didn't look like her other friends. He had body piercings, spiked hair, chains hanging from his jeans. There was something in his eyes every time I saw him that made me very uncomfortable, claimed Christine's mother. Chris did time in jail for armed robbery, and when he got out, he went straight to Christine. She felt bad for him because nobody wanted to be his friend, and she thought she could help him. Chris emotionally abused Christine, even showing up to school one day and embarrassing her by pulling her wig off in front of her classmates. Dr. Saltz claims it's not uncommon for a woman who has been bullied to fall in love with her abuser. Christine was swept up in a world of drugs and criminal activity. Her stepfather expressed, "We did everything in our power to get him away from her. But she's 16, 17 years old. There's only so much you can do." They attempted to ground Christine and take away her privileges, but as Tom stated, Chris had some sort of mental control over her that we couldn't break. They even consulted with attorneys and police officers to get a restraining order and have Chris arrested. Tom confessed, "We talked to her about it until we were blue in the face. She just felt she was going to be able to fix him, no matter what he did." As we all know, opposites attract, and jealousy was rampant in the relationship. Christine often seen making a scene at Chris's house. They would yell and scream at each other, and he would lock her out of his house when he was upset. Christine would sometimes even sleep on the lawn instead of going home so she could continue fighting with Chris the following day. His family began calling her the psycho, according to Chris's sister Brandy, for her obsessive behavior and crushing jealousy. Chris called the police on Christine several times throughout their relationship. On a hazy summer afternoon in July of 2003, Rachel and Tiffany were planning to have a small get-together with some friends around 6 p.m. at the one-story contemporary ranch-style house on Millbridge Drive. Earlier in the day, Tiffany's boyfriend Marcus Priscilla and his cousin Aldebert Sanchez returned to the house with 2 friends from a party the night before, but luckily for them, the friends did not stay long. Marcus was described as having laughter that echoed and was inspiring to his friends and family. He was attending San Benito College, where he was in the process of achieving his automotive technology certificate. He had plans to pursue his business degree in the fall. However, he hid a secret from his family. He was a dealer. Aldebert moved to Clear Lake City to escape violence in his neighborhood in an attempt to improve his life. His stepmother, Maricela Sanchez, said that he loved rap music and sang with a local group while planning to go to college to study computer technology. Aldebert was very close to his father and me, Maricela claimed. "We had a special love and communication, as parents do with their children." Marcus was known for often conducting business out of the home, and Chris was very aware of it. He always gave Christine a hard time about hanging out with her friends, and from what we have read, it seems like he was purposefully distancing her from them, making her believe she wasn't good enough to be in their clique. At around 3 p.m., Tiffany's friend Brittany, whose name was redacted due to anonymity, called her cell phone to let them know they would be heading over to her house soon. Marcus picked up the phone and mentioned that Tiffany was using the bathroom, so Brittany said she would call back. 30 minutes later, she tried calling her friend back, but no one picked up. Since she was already in the area with her boyfriend, nephew, and boyfriend's cousin, she decided to stop by and make sure everything was okay. Shortly after 6 p.m., Brittany pulled up to the house and noticed that Marcus's car was in the driveway, and Tiffany's truck was parked in front of the house with its back wheel up on the curb. Brittany got out of the car, figuring they must be home since their vehicles were there. She walked up to the door and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She cupped her hands on the window to peer in, but no sound came from the house. She continued to bang on the door, eventually forcing the unlocked door to creak open. The boys watched her from the car as she slowly stepped into the house. It was eerily quiet inside, and there was a metallic smell in the air. She crept down the hallway towards the living room, where she found a horrific sight, like nothing else she had ever seen. Brittany's boyfriend got out of the car to check on her, only to see her running out of the house, screaming, "Call the cops!" She dropped to the ground and began slamming her fists against the grass. She later told the police that when she walked in, she thought the teens were still sleeping. However, she quickly realized that the 4 of them were dead. Her boyfriend ran into the house to find out what was going on, and there he saw the 4 teens covered in blood with spatter across the ceiling and bullet shells strewn across the living room. He ran back out into the street and noticed a neighbor out on his lawn. As he ran to him, he yelled, "Call the police, call the police." The neighbor dialed 911. When the police arrived, they found the bodies of Rachel, Tiffany, Marcus, and Adalbert shot multiple times at point-blank range. There was a lot of rage and anger behind these killings, and so therefore we thought perhaps there was a personal relationship between the victims in the home and the killer. Houston Police Sergeant Brian Harris told ABC News, "The kids are drenched in blood. There's blood spatter on the walls.
There's bullet hole gone into the victims and outside of them."
The group of teens was not considered to be troubled or surrounded by crime.
People were angry, afraid. Nobody knew who did this. It was young kids in the middle of the day in a nice neighborhood.
The community grieved with the families. Their peers spoke to the news claiming,
All people, it's always the best ones.
and Tiffany was the sweetest girl you ever met in your life. She never had a bad bone in her body. Their friend who seemed to take the news the hardest was Christine. She spent every night after the murders in her parents' bed, crying and afraid. Even with a large amount of evidence piling up, police still had few leads to go on. There were 0 DNA matches and no useful fingerprints. The forensics were unable to identify the killer. Adalbert had been known to have ties to the Mexican mafia, but nothing followed through with that lead. On a case this massive, you go back to the basics.
And you look at your victims and you start seeing what their relationships are.
Mentioned Sergeant Brian Harris. When police began conducting interviews with neighbors, they created a sketch of potential perpetrators, including 1 male and 1 female in dark clothing that was seen walking up to the house. The female was described as wearing a bandana and had abnormally large eyes. The sketches look pretty familiar, huh? 3 years passed, and the police had not much to go on. Rachel's father decided to take matters into his own hands and began conducting an investigation on his own, spending hundreds of dollars on large billboards displaying the police sketches. As word spread, a man saw the sketch of the wide-eyed girl on the evening news and found it to look quite familiar to a girl he had attended rehab with. He contacted Crime Stoppers and told the police that a girl named Christine Paolila admitted to him that she was a participant in a crime, and she looked extremely similar to the sketch on the news. Police went on the hunt and found Christine in a decrepit, smelly motel room in San Antonio, Texas. She had been spending the last 6 months in the room getting high with her boyfriend, Justin Rott. Police found over 70 vials of heroin and hundreds of used needles. The room was covered in rotting food, dog feces, and blood spatter. When the pair were taken into custody, Justin confessed that one evening they were watching TV and the police sketches came up on the screen. Christine began yelling at him, oh my," over and over. Then she said, "Does that look like me?" Justin claimed that Christine admitted going to the house to participate in the theft of drugs with her boyfriend, Chris Snyder. When they got to the house and banged on the door around 4 p.m. that fateful day, she seemed to have no problem joining Chris in the killing of her friends. He mentioned that Christine even returned to the scene to make sure everyone had been killed and found Rachel crawling towards a cell phone. He then told police that she used the end of the gun to beat her friend. Justin also mentioned that she showed up to her shift as a cashier at Walgreens less than an hour after the massacre. When the police found Rachel's body, a cell phone was near her hand with the numbers 91 typed in. In 2006, Chris moved to Greenville, South Carolina, with a woman he had met online. Following Christine's arrest, His family told him that a warrant had been issued for him as well. The police received a tip that he was living in Greenville, and there was a chance he may end his own life. Areas where he was reported to have been seen were searched, and on August 5th, his body was found in a forest across the road from his girlfriend's house. It was reported that he had overdosed on prescription medication. When Christine was finally brought into custody, she was interrogated by the lead detective, Brian Harris. After he read her rights, he asked,
Do you believe you deserve justice or mercy?
At which she seems confused and responds with, mercy. This comment would later be brought up by her defense, questioning if she truly understood what the detective was explaining to her under the circumstances she was in. She then went on to mention that she isn't afraid of what Chris might do to her family if she says anything to the police. She described Chris as a very hopeless person who often begged her for pity. She also said she stayed with him because she wanted to help him get better, but often felt like she was just enabling him. As the detective brought her back to the day of the murder, she explained how she was hanging out at her house with Chris when he went to the backyard to do drugs. She was upset with him for it, so she brought him inside to fight away from the neighbors, where he threatened to leave. At this point in the interview, she slipped up by saying, She went on to say that they got physical with each other before leaving the house to take him home. Once they got to his home, she claimed he wanted her to take him to Seabrook to get more drugs. However, as they neared Seabrook, he changed his mind and decided they should go to Tiffany's house to find Marcus.
You pull in the subdivision, where do you go? Do you go down their street?
Well, there's a couple of streets before. I didn't drive on their street.
Okay. And why did you go to the couple of streets before? What did he...
Well, I had wanted to turn around. I had been late for work already.
But obviously that was not the case. Initially, she claimed she took off in the car and turned back around to pick him up as he was walking away from the house with a bag of pills. However, because of Justin's confession, the detective knew she had been inside of the house with him. She said he went back into the house after she pulled around the block again, but we know from Justin's testimony that Christine was holding the gun. After she said Chris committed the murders, she claimed he ran up to her car, holding the gun, saying,
Some people are just the wrong place at the wrong time.
According to her husband, Justin, Chris handed her a gun just before they entered the home. She then told him that Chris shot Marcus and her gun went off on its own, a theory that was quickly debunked by the Houston Police Department firearms experts, who testified that neither guns used in the crime found at Chris's parents' home in Louisville, Kentucky, would go off as Christine claimed. He said she went through the stages of grief with him: shock, anger, denial, and acceptance. Between Justin's testimony and Christine's various interrogations, the police put together a timeline of how they saw the afternoon play out. On July 18, 2003, Chris and Christine showed up at Tiffany's home at around 4 p.m. They entered the house, and Chris held the teens at gunpoint while Christine forced Marcus to take her around the home, collecting everything they planned on stealing. When they were done with the robbery, the pair were afraid to leave witnesses. When this type of death happens, it's said to be evidence of sexual envy. Sexual envy is an emotional response to the threat of infidelity, something Christine expressed in one of her interrogations. Tiffany and Aldebert were found on the couch with zero signs of defense and filled with bullets from both guns. Marcus was found with blunt force trauma to his head and multiple gunshot wounds. Sadly, Rachel went through the most pain, as there were signs that she attempted to escape, but failed at doing so. Police found gunshots in her buttocks, severe blunt force trauma after she was discovered trying to call 911. Christine refused to take the blame for the killings, stating that Chris was abusive and controlling. She also claimed that although she held the gun, it was Chris who put his hand around hers and forced her to shoot it. With all the evidence mentioned so far, it's clear that although he may have had a hold over her, she took part in the death of her friends. On October 13, 2008, Christine Palolia was convicted of 4 counts of capital murder. Her lawyer attempted to discredit the case by painting Justin Rott as a conniving drug addict who reported his wife to Crime Stoppers in order to claim a substantial reward. He was known to take advantage of women in rehabilitation centers who had money, which was why he chose to date Christine shortly after she received her inheritance from her father's death. a lump sum of $360,000. He was also caught with large amounts of cocaine on him and was believed to have made a deal with prosecution so that he would not be charged again. However, the fact that the two eyewitnesses who lived next door to Tiffany testified they both watched a young blonde man and a woman carrying a large black bag casually walk down the street towards the home was highly suspicious. When asked about her relationship with Chris, she claimed to be another victim of his crimes. However, evidence showed that after the murders, she continued to call his cell phone over 1,000 times, ultimately showing that she willingly took part in the murders. As she was a minor at that time, the state did not seek the death penalty and instead sentenced her to life without eligibility for parole until 2046, at the age of 60. Following the verdict, Christine was led away in tears. Rachel's father told the press, "I feel justice was served. It's a good step towards closure." Many points are up for debate when it comes to whether or not Christine had the capacity to waive her rights when police began questioning her, as she was experiencing withdrawal. Even so, her crimes go on to be some of the most heinous acts ever committed by a youth in America. The fact that she assisted in murdering her only friends, the same friends she said were the only people who would never stab her in the back, is disturbing and vile. On top of the victims who passed, we can never forget the living victims of this tragedy. The slain teenagers' families, they have all expressed an intense amount of pain. Tiffany's father, Chester Rowell, has maintained his silence since the death of his daughter. Adelbert's stepmother, Marciela, has shared her thoughts saying, "I don't know how to explain our suffering. It has broken our hearts." Marcus's stepfather, David Gronwald, has said they will never again feel the sense of hope that they used to feel. He described Tiffany as very friendly, lovable, and always had a radiant smile on her face. It was obvious that they were very happy, and their happiness was contagious to the people around them. Rachel's mother, Anne Colorodis, described her daughter as a tremendous source of joy in her life. Christine Paleola's case has been covered by several news outlets. There are still so many questions that haven't been answered. What would Chris have said if he stood trial instead of ending his own life? Do you think Christine's childhood was to blame? As always, let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to find out what crime we are going to cover next.